My name is Tessa. I'm 32 years old, born and raised in Austin, Texas. I've always been a dreamer. Always hoping for more, always pushing the boundaries of what I could achieve. But there was one thing that I could never escape: the way people looked at me, or more precisely, the way they didn't. I've had a birthmark on my face since I can remember, right below my left eye, a dark splotch that stretched down my cheek. It didn't help that my skin tone was already darker than most people in the office, and the birthmark only drew more attention to my difference. People called it a flaw, something that made me not quite right, and it was a label I carried with me every single day. From the moment I stepped into that office as a young professional, I knew I'd be judged differently. I was always told that I could never be the face of the company, that my look, my skin, my birthmark, didn't fit the stereotypical mold of success. I worked hard, though. I put my head down and let my skills speak for themselves. But the more I excelled, the more I realized that my appearance was something that always came up in the background. It wasn't just about my qualifications, it was about my face. People avoided making eye contact, choosing to look past me when discussing important matters, as if my value wasn't as high as the others, simply because of my looks. I remember one particular meeting where the team was discussing the next big campaign for the company. I had worked hard on it, put in late nights, doing everything I could to make sure our proposal was solid, but when it came time to pitch the idea, I was asked to stay back in the corner, away from the table, where I could observe and take notes. I could see them whispering, and I knew exactly what they were thinking. She's not quite the right image for this kind of thing. I could feel the weight of their expectations pressing down on me. It was as though they thought I couldn't handle the pressure, or that my looks were somehow a barrier to my potential. But it didn't stop me. I kept pushing, I kept fighting. I continued doing the work, showing up every day, never complaining, never revealing how much it hurt. I had a job to do. But with every promotion opportunity, with every new project, I was pushed further into the background, never given the spotlight, never asked to sit at the decision-making table, and I let it happen. I stayed silent, not because I didn't have a voice, but because I was used to being overlooked, being told that someone else would be the better fit. But deep down, something inside me was burning. I wasn't going to stay in the shadows forever. I remember looking at myself in the mirror one morning before work, running my fingers along the edge of the dark mark on my face. For the first time in a long time, I didn't feel disgusted. I didn't feel ashamed. I was learning to love this part of me, this scar, this flaw that everyone else seemed to see as something that made me less. It wasn't something that defined me, it was a part of me, just as much as my drive, my ambition, my passion for the work I did. It had always been there, right under the surface, and it was time for me to stop hiding from it. This birthmark, this scar, was not the problem. The problem was the way the world chose to see it, and me. The problem was the way the world told me I wasn't enough. As I prepared for another day at the office, my mind wandered to the upcoming presentation. I had worked tirelessly on this one. This was going to be my moment, my chance to prove everyone wrong. And yet, I knew that even if I did a great job, they would still see me for what I looked like, not for what I could do. But I was ready. I was more than ready. Today was the day I was going to show them who I really was. It wasn't just about signing contracts or making sales. It was about showing them that a face like mine could hold power. That a face like mine could lead a company. That a face like mine was not a flaw, but a strength. And though I knew I would have to fight even harder for recognition, I had come to a realization. It was time to stop waiting for the validation I would never get. It was time to make my own path, to take what I deserved, and to prove that I, Tessa, was more than just a face in the crowd, and I was ready to show the world. I knew they didn't take me seriously. It was something I could feel, deep in my bones, even before they spoke the words. It wasn't always overt, but it was there. Subtle, insidious. The way their eyes lingered just a moment too long on the scar on my face, the way they'd look away quickly, as if my appearance was something to be avoided, something unprofessional. My skin, the dark spot that had been with me since birth, was the first thing they saw. And it was the last thing they could get past. I knew it. I felt it, but I never said anything. I just smiled, nodded, and played the part. That was my role. Always the background. Always supporting but never leading. In the office, I was rarely invited to the meetings that mattered. The ones where the big decisions were made. Those meetings were reserved for the people who fit a certain image, the polished, the flawless, the ones who looked like they belonged in positions of power. I was never one of them. It wasn't even something I had to fight for. It was simply understood. I didn't have the look, the type of face or skin they could present to clients as a reflection of their company's success. At first, I tried to fight it. I worked harder, stayed later, always producing results. But that wasn't enough. The lack of recognition wasn't because of my work ethic, but because of the way they saw me, the way I looked, the way my face betrayed me before I even spoke a word. At first, I was angry, furious even. I watched as others, less capable, were given opportunities simply because they fit the mold. They could speak with clients, take charge of the meetings, be the face of the company. They had the right look, the right presence. I would sit there in silence, observing from the sidelines, feeling the frustration building inside me. What was it about my face that made them believe I wasn't capable? That made them think I couldn't lead? It wasn't just the scar, though it was the most obvious thing. It was the fact that I didn't meet their image of perfection. I didn't fit their standards of what a powerful woman should look like. But no one ever said it outright. They didn't have to. It was the little things, the gestures that said more than words ever could. The way they'd address me as assistant or secretary, never considering the fact that I had the skills, the knowledge, the expertise to do more. And I let it slide. For years, I let it slide because I convinced myself that it didn't matter. I was still doing my job, still getting things done. But deep down, I knew it mattered. I knew that in their eyes, I would never be more than someone to be kept in the background. But there were moments when it was too much to ignore. The small comments made under their breath when they thought I wasn't listening. The way they would turn away when it was time to make a decision. They never trusted me to handle the tough calls. Even though I was the one who had worked tirelessly behind the scenes to ensure everything ran smoothly. They never saw the effort I put in, the sacrifices I made to keep things running. All they saw was my face, my skin, my imperfection. I was invisible to them, not because I wasn't capable, but because they couldn't get past what they saw on the surface. And then there was the meeting, the one where everything changed. It wasn't planned, it wasn't rehearsed. But that day, I wasn't going to stay silent anymore. I had worked hard to get to that point, putting in the hours, the sacrifices, everything I had into this company. I had the expertise, the knowledge, the vision to lead. Yet, there I was, still being dismissed, still being pushed aside. The invitation came late, and I knew it was a courtesy, an afterthought. They had a meeting with the biggest client we had, and they had forgotten to invite me. I wasn't even on the list. The client was one of the most important for the company, and yet they didn't consider me important enough to be in the room. But that day, I decided that I would walk in, uninvited, and take my place at the table. I didn't need their permission to be there anymore. I had earned my seat. I walked into the conference room, confident and calm, with my lawyer by my side. The room went silent when they saw me. The same people who had never considered me worthy of the room now looked at me with surprise and confusion. I didn't even acknowledge their stares. Instead, I sat down at the head of the table. The documents I had been holding for months were now in my hands. The contracts, the signatures, the deals that had been made without my name on them, were now officially mine. I wasn't there to ask for their permission. I was there to show them that this business, this company, was mine. And when the CEO finally spoke, I didn't hesitate. I put my pen to the paper, signed the contract, and looked him in the eye. The unspoken bias that had held me back for so long, that had tried to push me into the background, had finally been shattered. I wasn't invisible anymore. I was here to stay, and they were going to see me for who I really was, not the woman they thought they knew, but the one who had been in control all along. It wasn't the blatant rejection that hurt the most. No, it was the subtle things, the way the conversations seemed to freeze when I entered the room. How the eyes of those around me would shift uncomfortably. They didn't outright tell me that I didn't belong, but their actions spoke louder than any words ever could. The way they would assign me the smallest tasks, the ones that no one else wanted to do. The ones that would keep me behind the scenes, out of view, out of sight. It wasn't that they thought I wasn't capable. It was that they didn't think I belonged. I didn't fit their mold. My skin, those patches of lighter pigmentation that had been a part of me for as long as I could remember, were often the first thing people noticed about me. And even though they never said anything outright, I could feel the judgment in their gazes. They would linger just a moment too long, eyes dropping to my face, before hastily looking away. It wasn't something they meant to do, but it was there like an invisible wall between me and them, a wall that kept me on the outside looking in, I was used to it. For years, I had learned how to adapt. I became a master at reading the room, at understanding who I could talk to and who would ignore me the moment I opened my mouth. I had learned to remain quiet in meetings, to let others take the spotlight while I quietly worked in the background. It wasn't that I didn't have something to contribute, it was that I had been conditioned to believe my contributions weren't needed, that my voice didn't matter. It was as if I wasn't worthy of being heard. But deep down, I knew the truth. The truth was that they saw my skin before they saw my abilities. They saw the imperfections, the marks on my face, and they assumed that I couldn't possibly be as capable as someone who fit their idea of beauty and success. They were wrong, but how could I convince them otherwise when I had spent so many years allowing their perceptions to dictate my actions? It wasn't just in the office, it was everywhere. At family gatherings, I was always the one who was expected to stay in the background, to blend in, to remain silent. My relatives, well-meaning, but uninformed, would comment on how I should fix my skin, as though it were something to be ashamed of. They didn't understand that I didn't need to change to fit their ideal of what was acceptable. I had learned to love myself just as I was, flaws and all. But that didn't mean it was easy. Every day, I had to fight the urge to hide away from the world, to shield myself from the judgment that was always just beneath the surface. There were times when I felt like I was invisible. It wasn't that people ignored MIT, was that they saw me but didn't really see me. They didn't acknowledge my ideas, my intelligence, my work ethic. They saw the marks on my face and stopped there. They didn't realize how hard I had worked to get to where I was, how many late nights I had spent perfecting my craft, how many sacrifices I had made to build something meaningful. It didn't matter how much I accomplished, none of it seemed to matter, as long as I didn't fit their idea of who I was supposed to be. And then there were the times when I would try to speak up, to make myself heard, only to be cut off or ignored. It was as though my words held no weight, my presence no power. I would try to push past the discomfort, but it was like walking through a thick fog. They would look at me and smile, but I could see it in their eyes. They didn't believe I belonged there, didn't believe I had the right to claim space in their world. It was exhausting, being constantly overlooked, constantly relegated to the sidelines. But even in those moments, I didn't give up. I couldn't. There was a fire in me, a determination that wouldn't let me fade into the background, no matter how hard I tried to suppress it. It burned inside me, and I knew that one day, I would find the right moment to show them that I was more than just the surface. That I was more than the marks on my skin. That I was capable of achieving everything I had worked for, no matter how many times I had been made to feel like I didn't deserve it. And so, I stayed quiet. I stayed in the background, observing, learning, and waiting. I knew the time would come when I would need to prove myself. When the moment arrived, I would be ready. I would no longer let their biases define me. I would take control of my own story, and they would see who I truly was. But for now, I bided my time, knowing that the subtle rejection was only the beginning. The real story was yet to come. I had always known there was more to me than what people saw. I could feel the potential bubbling inside, but it was like a secret. Something I kept hidden both from others and, at times, even from myself. The truth was, every time I tried to show it, I was met with resistance, not just from the outside world, but from the voice inside my head that doubted whether it was worth it. So, I hid. I let them label me, let them see the girl with the imperfect skin, the one who wasn't fit for the limelight, the one who was better off behind the scenes. I played along, thinking it was easier to be small than to face the rejection that would come if I dared to take center stage. But deep inside, I was never just small. I wasn't just the sum of my imperfections, my scars, or the way people would glance at my face as though it were a map of flaws they couldn't ignore. I knew that. It was there, buried beneath years of conditioning, beneath the quiet acceptance of their opinions. The potential had always been there, but I had kept it locked away because, who would want to hear from someone who didn't fit the mold? Who would believe in someone like me? That day, as I watched everyone gather around the conference table, a sense of quiet dread settled in my chest. I could feel their judgment, their eyes that never quite met mine, as they whispered behind my back, pretending not to notice the red spots that painted my face. The meeting was supposed to be a turning point, the one that could shift everything for our company. The team was discussing a critical deal, and they had all gathered to put their heads together, to hammer out the terms that would set us on the right path. I wasn't supposed to be there. I knew that. I had been relegated to the periphery of these conversations for so long. It was easier for them to pretend I wasn't there, to act like I didn't have the credentials to participate. They saw me as an assistant at best, someone to take the notes, to fill the gaps, to stay silent and stay out of the way. But they didn't know what was going on behind the scenes, what they hadn't seen, what they had dismissed without a second thought. In the shadows, I had been quietly building my own empire. It wasn't just about numbers or contracts. It was about a vision they could never see. One I had crafted and nurtured for years while they continued to focus on appearances. I had been the silent architect of our success, taking risks they never would have believed I was capable of. The meetings they thought I couldn't handle, I ran them. The decisions they thought I couldn't make, I made them. And the deal they thought I couldn't close, I was the one who had been negotiating it behind their backs for months. I had made my mark in the industry long before anyone realized it. And when the time came, I was ready. The deal was mine, and no one could take credit for it. No one could deny my place at the table anymore. I wasn't going to let them. It wasn't just about proving them wrong. It was about proving something to myself. I had spent too many years thinking that I didn't belong, that I had to hide my true potential behind a facade of meekness and invisibility. But now, it was time to stop hiding. It was time to stop letting the limitations they imposed on me define who I was. I wasn't just the woman with the blemishes on her face. I was the woman who had built something meaningful, something they could never have imagined. I had made something out of nothing, and I had done it on my own terms. As I walked into the conference room, my heart pounded with anticipation. It wasn't just the fear of facing the people who had dismissed me for so long. It was the fear of facing myself, of finally accepting that I had the power to change everything. I wasn't the assistant anymore. I wasn't the one who had to hide. I was the one with the answers, the one who had the plan. I stood at the head of the table, the contract in my hands, and as I placed it down, the room fell silent. I could feel the weight of their eyes on me, but this time, it was different. This time, there was no shame, no hesitation. I had earned my place, and no one could take that away from me. I didn't need to say anything. The signature on the document spoke for itself. The deal was done, and I had signed it. In that moment, I understood that the true potential I had been hiding wasn't just about my abilities, it was about knowing my worth, about believing in myself enough to step into the light and take what was rightfully mine. And as I looked around the room, I could see it in their eyes. They knew too. It was as if the world had finally caught up with me in that moment, and I could feel everything I had been holding back threatening to spill over. The day had started like any other, the typical routine, the same unspoken assumptions that I was still the same person they had always seen, small, meek, invisible. But as I walked into the room, I could sense something was different. The air felt heavier, more charged. I had been playing this game for so long, hiding in plain sight, letting them think they knew me. But this time I was done pretending. As I stood at the threshold of the conference room, I could feel their eyes on me, sizing me up, silently judging me, as they had always done. The familiar stares at my skin, the lingering glances at my blemishes, the way they looked past me as if I were invisible, it was all too familiar. For years, I had endured this. I had made myself smaller to fit into a space they had created. For me, one where I didn't take up too much room, where I didn't disrupt their expectations. But today, something inside me shifted. Today, I wasn't going to shrink. I could see the surprise in their eyes as I walked to the head of the table. My heels clicking against the floor, each step echoing louder than the last. It felt like the world was holding its breath, waiting for me to stumble, waiting for me to falter. But I didn't. I kept walking, my posture straight, my confidence building with each step. They thought they knew me. They thought they could judge me by the way I looked, by the things they assumed about me based on the color of my skin and the marks on my face. But they had no idea who I really was. They had no idea what I was capable of. As I placed the contract on the table, the silence in the room was deafening. I could feel their eyes on me. Every single person in that room was staring at me. And for the first time, I didn't feel the weight of their judgment. I didn't feel the need to apologize for taking up space. I didn't feel the urge to shrink back and let them take control. This was my moment. My time. The years of being overlooked, of being the person they didn't think could handle responsibility, were behind me. They didn't know what I had been building all these years. They didn't know how hard I had fought, how much I had sacrificed, all the while hiding in the shadows, letting them think I was weak. But I wasn't weak. And I wasn't going to let them dictate who I was any longer. The man who had always introduced me as his secretary. The one who had constantly brushed aside my ideas and dismissed my opinions, stood there now, speechless. I could see the surprise on his face, and in that moment, I realized something. He had underestimated me for so long. He had dismissed me because of my appearance, because of the flaws he saw on my face. But what he couldn't see, what he had never bothered to look for, was the strength I had been building within. I wasn't just the woman with the marks on her face anymore. I was the woman who had put in the work. I was the woman who had made the decisions, taken the risks, and built something from the ground up. I was the woman who had made this deal happen, not because they had given me a chance, but because I had earned it. And now, as I stood in front of them, holding the power in my hands, I realized just how much I had underestimated myself. All those years of hiding, of thinking I wasn't enough, had been in vain. I had always been enough. I could see the look in their eyes, the realization that they had gotten it wrong, that they had misjudged me. It was too late for them to turn back now. The deal was done, and I had signed it. There was no denying who had made it happen. It wasn't him. It wasn't anyone else in the room. It was me. And for the first time, I was finally letting the world see that. The world had always looked at me and seen only the surface, the things they assumed they knew. But now, it was my turn to show them what lay beneath. To show them the woman they had ignored for so long. The woman who was capable of far more than they ever imagined. In that moment, I realized that the true power wasn't in what they thought of me, but in how I saw myself. It wasn't in their judgments, their biases, or their assumptions. It was in my strength, my determination, and my ability to stand up and finally take my place. I wasn't just the secretary anymore. I wasn't just the woman with the marks on her face. I was the one who had made it happen, and I wasn't going anywhere. It was as if the world had finally caught up with me in that moment, and I could feel everything I had been holding back, threatening to spill over. The day had started like any other, the typical routine, the same unspoken assumptions that I was still the same person they had always seen, small, meek, invisible. But as I walked into the room, I could sense something was different. The air felt heavier, more charged. I had been playing this game for so long, hiding in plain sight, letting them think they knew me. But this time I was done pretending. As I stood at the threshold of the conference room, I could feel their eyes on me, sizing me up, silently judging me, as they had always done. The familiar stares at my skin, the lingering glances at my blemishes, the way they looked past me as if I were invisible, it was all too familiar. For years, I had endured this. I had made myself smaller to fit into a space they had created. For me, one where I didn't take up too much room, where I didn't disrupt their expectations. But today, something inside me shifted. Today, I wasn't going to shrink. I could see the surprise in their eyes as I walked to the head of the table. My heels clicking against the floor, each step echoing louder than the last. It felt like the world was holding its breath, waiting for me to stumble, waiting for me to falter. But I didn't. I kept walking, my posture straight, my confidence building with each step. They thought they knew me. They thought they could judge me by the way I looked, by the things they assumed about me based on the color of my skin and the marks on my face. But they had no idea who I really was. They had no idea what I was capable of. As I placed the contract on the table, the silence in the room was deafening. I could feel their eyes on me. Every single person in that room was staring at me. And for the first time, I didn't feel the weight of their judgment. I didn't feel the need to apologize for taking up space. I didn't feel the urge to shrink back and let them take control. This was my moment. My time. The years of being overlooked, of being the person they didn't think could handle responsibility, were behind me. They didn't know what I had been building all these years. They didn't know how hard I had fought, how much I had sacrificed, all the while hiding in the shadows, letting them think I was weak. But I wasn't weak. And I wasn't going to let them dictate who I was any longer. The man who had always introduced me as his secretary, the one who had constantly brushed aside my ideas and dismissed my opinions, stood there now, speechless. I could see the surprise on his face, and in that moment, I realized something. He had underestimated me for so long. He had dismissed me because of my appearance, because of the flaws he saw on my face. But what he couldn't see, what he had never bothered to look for, was the strength I had been building within. I wasn't just the woman with the marks on her face anymore. I was the woman who had put in the work. I was the woman who had made the decisions, taken the risks, and built something from the ground up. I was the woman who had made this deal happen, not because they had given me a chance, but because I had earned it. And now, as I stood in front of them, holding the power in my hands, I realized just how much I had underestimated myself. All those years of hiding, of thinking I wasn't enough, had been in vain. I had always been enough. I could see the look in their eyes, the realization that they had gotten it wrong, that they had misjudged me. It was too late for them to turn back now. The deal was done, and I had signed it. There was no denying who had made it happen. It wasn't him. It wasn't anyone else in the room. It was me. And for the first time, I was finally letting the world see that. The world had always looked at me and seen only the surface, the things they assumed they knew. But now, it was my turn to show them what lay beneath. To show them the woman they had ignored for so long. The woman who was capable of far more than they ever imagined. In that moment, I realized that the true power wasn't in what they thought of me, but in how I saw myself. It wasn't in their judgments, their biases, or their assumptions. It was in my strength, my determination, and my ability to stand up and finally take my place. I wasn't just the secretary anymore. I wasn't just the woman with the marks on her face. I was the one who had made it happen. And I wasn't going anywhere. The room was silent. The usual murmur of voices had faded as I stood at the head of the table, facing them all. They had been so sure of themselves, so confident in their assumptions about me, but now, their eyes were wide, and I could feel their gaze shifting between the contract in front of me and my face. As though trying to reconcile the woman they had dismissed with the person they saw now. The one who had just signed the deal. That would change everything. For years, I had been the invisible one, the one pushed to the side because of how I looked. The scars on my face, the marks that had been a part of me since I was young, had always been a source of ridicule. They had never taken me seriously. In their eyes, I was just the secretary. The background figure who never had the authority to speak, let alone make decisions. But here I was, standing before them, taking control in a way they never expected. I had played along for so long, allowing them to believe that I was nothing more than a secondary character in their world. I stayed quiet, did my job, and watched as they made decisions, assuming I had no voice. I had swallowed the hurt over the years, pretending it didn't bother me when they questioned my competence, when they overlooked my ideas, when they treated me as if I were invisible. They had never known how much I was capable of, how much I was doing in the shadows, behind the scenes, just waiting for the moment when I could finally show them. That moment had arrived. I looked at the faces around the table now, each of them still in shock, some still struggling to process the reality that the deal they had thought was out of their reach had just been sealed by me, the woman they had never expected to be in charge. The woman they had thought could never make the hard decisions, was the one who had taken control. I could feel the power in that realization, and it made everything I had endured seem almost worth it almost. But as the silence stretched on, I noticed one thing. The man who had introduced me as his secretary, who had once dismissed me with a smile and a pat on the back, was now looking at me with a mix of disbelief and regret. I could see it in his eyes, the understanding that he had gotten it all wrong, that he had misjudged me for so long. But it was too late for him. Too late for all of them. They had made their assumptions, and now they would have to live with the consequences. They had underestimated me. And now I was the one who held the power. I took a deep breath and leaned forward, my fingers brushing the edges of the contract. They were still waiting for me to speak, for me to confirm what they already knew, that I had just made the deal of a lifetime. But I didn't need to say anything. The silence in the room spoke louder than words. I had already made my statement. My actions had spoken for me. There was a moment of hesitation, then one by one, they began to look at me differently. I could feel the shift in the room, the acknowledgement that they had been wrong about me. They had thought I was weak, that I couldn't handle the pressure, that I was just another woman with imperfections who would fade into the background. But now, they saw me for who I really was, a force to be reckoned with, a woman who had been hiding her strength all along. I stood there for a moment, letting the weight of the situation sink in. This wasn't just about the deal I had signed. It wasn't just about proving them wrong. It was about reclaiming the space I had always deserved, the respect I had been denied for so long. It was about showing them, once and for all, that I was more than just my appearance. More than just the woman with the scars on her face. I was the woman who had built something. I was the woman who had made it happen. And now, as I looked around the room, I realized that it didn't matter what they had thought of me before. What mattered was what they thought of me now. And for the first time, I didn't need their approval. I didn't need their validation. I had earned my place at the table, and I was finally going to take it. The door had closed behind me, but the real breakthrough had just begun.